Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book the Hadrami introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which is an introductory text in the fiqh of the Shafi'i school, written by the Allama Bafadl, may Allah have mercy on him. In the text, we've arrived at page 15. We've arrived at page 15. In the lower half of the page. Page 15 in the lower half of the page, in which the author, may Allah have mercy upon him, lists the things that are najas. Many of you who've taken lessons from me before have heard me say that there are 15 things that are najas. The author here, he numbered the things differently than I do. So his list, he has 9 things. He numbers it as 9 things. I number it as 15 things, but the list is what the list is. There's no difference between what I'm talking about when I say 15 things and what he's talking about when he numbers it 1 to 9. These numbers are not from the author of the book, by the way. The translator numbered them like this. The author, Bafadl, did not give numbers. May Allah have mercy on him. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, impurities are. Okay, so in this chapter, he's going to list what are the things that are najas. What are the things that are najasa? In Arabic, this word najas, N-A-J-A-S, najas, and the word najasa, N-A-J-A-A-S-A-H, najasa. These words are synonyms. Okay, najas and najasa refer to things that the Sharia declares to be filthy. These things, if they're on your body or on your clothing, or if you touch them while, if they're on your body or on your clothing, they will invalidate the salat. Or if you or your clothes touch them in the course of the salat, or if any of these things are being carried by you at some point in the salat, it will break the salat unless it's excused. And there are certain cases where najasa might be on you and it would be excused. Pretty soon we're going to go into this section about salat, and we're going to mention there, if this happens and najasa hits you like this, or najasa hits you like this, what do you do? In order for you to have a clearer idea about what we're talking about, it helps you to know what are the things that are najas. Okay, and it will also help you in your life because any of these things you might encounter. Okay, so let's start with the list. The impurities. Number one, wine. Okay, so the first thing in the list of things that are najis is wine. What is wine? Wine is grape juice that has been left to ferment. Wine is grape juice that has been left to ferment. Okay, if you take fresh grapes and you squeeze them, the juice comes out and you end up with grape juice. Grape juice is not najis. Right? We are allowed to drink grape juice. It's not najis. But if you leave that grape juice there, over time, something happens to it where it turns into wine and becomes alcoholic. Once the grape juice turns into wine, it became najis. That liquid is now najis filthy because it has become wine. Prior to that, it was not wine. It was juice. But now it's wine, so now it's najis. Okay, why am I going through all this? Because it's important for you to understand that when the scholars say wine, they're referring to grape juice that was left alone until it fermented. Okay, that's what they mean. Grape juice, not anything else. All right, this word wine doesn't apply to, beer or vodka or those other things. Okay, wine refers to grape juice that fermented. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, even if respected. So what he's saying here is wine is always najis. Even in the case where that wine is something that's permissible for you to have. Okay, wine, because it's najis filthy, it's haram for you to buy it. Okay, it cannot be bought and sold. A sale is not going to be a valid sale if you're buying or selling something najis. So wine cannot be bought and it cannot be sold. Okay. Nonetheless, it is possible for a person to have some wine and for it to be permissible for him to have that wine. Okay, it's not permissible for him to drink it. It's not permissible for him to put the wine on his body or on his clothing. Okay, but it's permissible for him to simply have wine in his house. All right, there are cases where this is permissible. And that case is which case? If the person juiced those grapes, he made the grape juice with the intention of producing vinegar. Okay, so when you juice the grapes, in the beginning, it's grape juice, which is not najis. It's permissible for us to drink. But if you let it sit, it will turn into wine, in which case it becomes najis, and it's not permissible for us to drink or even to come into contact with. But if you let that wine sit more time, after a while, the wine will turn into vinegar. And once the wine turns into vinegar, it ceases to be najis and it becomes permissible for us to eat again. Okay, it's permissible for us to consume vinegar. It's not permissible for us to consume wine. So if someone juiced the grapes and his intention in juicing the grapes is to produce vinegar, there's going to be a period of time where that grape juice will be wine. We say about that wine that it's respectable. Okay? Not because wine is something that's respectable, not because we're allowed to consume the wine. No, we're not allowed to consume the wine. We say that wine is respectable simply because it's permissible Islamically for a person to juice the grapes with the intention of making vinegar. And during the process of that happening, for a while, it will be wine. And so it's permissible for him to keep it as wine as long as he's just letting it sit until it becomes vinegar. The author here, what he lists, he begins this list, number one, by mentioning that wine is najis, even if it's the respected kind of wine. The wine that was juiced just so that it can become vinegar. During the time that it's wine, it's still najis filthy. Excuse me one moment. Assalamu alaikum. Number 2 on the list, the translator says, as well as nabith. May Allah preserve him. So in the way I number it, I would count nabith as number 2 on the list. Nabith, originally in the Arabic language, the word nabith referred to an alcoholic beverage that was made by putting dried dates or dried raisins into water. And if you let it sit for a while, it will ferment and turn into an alcoholic beverage as well. Originally in the Arabic language, that's what the word nabith was used to mean. But here in this book, the word nabith, it refers to that stuff, that which was made from dates or raisins. But by qiyas, it also refers to every other intoxicating liquid. So things like beer, things like vodka, whiskey, gin, all those other alcoholic beverages that are not wine, they are also najis because they are treated as if they are nabith. And nabith is number 2 on the list of things that's najis. Okay, once you understand that, you kind of understand why the translator put them all together as number 1, because he's just saying, hey, all those alcoholic beverages are all najis. Okay, but I see a certain wisdom in separating them. So I count wine as number 1, and I count all of the other alcoholic beverages as number 2. Next, the translator says, dog, swine, and their offspring. This I would count as number 3, number 4, and number 5. Okay, dogs are najis filthy. Okay, when we say dog, we mean actual dogs. Okay, we're not talking about foxes. We're not talking about wolves. Okay, in English, sometimes people refer to wolves as dogs. Some people might even refer to a fox as a dog. But in the Arabic language, the Arabic word kelb cannot be truthfully applied to a fox nor to a wolf. In the Arabic language, the word kelb refers to dogs. Okay? And these rules from the Sharia are derived from the revelation and from the teachings of our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, both of which were given to us by means of Arabic language. So we have to understand these words according to how the Arabic language uses them. And in the Arabic language, dog refers to dogs, does not refer to wolves, does not refer to foxes, and things like that. Dog are the things that we typically call dogs, German shepherds and golden retrievers and chihuahuas and Rottweilers and all of that stuff. These things are all najis filthy, which means you need to avoid contact with them. They're all najis. Next on the list, number 4, in my counting, is swine. Swine, meaning pigs. These are also najis filthy. Okay, and for these dogs and these pigs, it doesn't matter if they are domestic. Like, are they domesticated? Are they pets? Are they on a farm? Okay, that doesn't matter, or even if they're wild. Okay, there are wild dogs like dingoes in Australia and Cape hunting dogs in Africa. There are wild dogs. Okay, and just like there are wild pigs, boars and warthogs and razorbacks, etc. It doesn't matter if the pig is wild or domesticated. All pigs, all types of pigs are najis filthy. All types of dogs are najis filthy. MashaAllah. Next, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, mentions, and their offspring. What's meant by their offspring? This is number 5, according to my counting of the things that are najis. It means something that's part dog or part pig. Okay, if you imagine a dog that produces a puppy with a wolf. Okay, a wolf is not a dog, but a dog is a dog. So if a wolf and a dog mate and produce a puppy, that puppy is half dog, half wolf. Because that puppy is half dog, it is also najis. It's najis filthy. Just like if that puppy then mated with a wolf again and had a puppy, this puppy would be 1/4 dog and 3/4 wolf. It also would be najis filthy because it's part dog. Okay, anything that's part dog is also najis filthy. Just like anything that's part pig is also najis filthy. So obviously, if a dog and a pig could somehow have an offspring, then that offspring would definitely be najis filthy because it's both part dog and part pig. Okay, any questions here about, we're listing here the things that are najis. So far, we've said wine, we've said all the other alcoholic beverages, we've said dogs, we've said pigs, and we've said anything that's the offspring of a dog or a pig. Next in the list. Actually, before I go on in the list, let me clarify something else about these dogs and these pigs. In fact, let me just say this generally about this entire list. The things in this list, they are filthy. The Sharia declares them to be filthy. I want you to understand that they themselves are filthy. Okay, some people, especially like Americans who aren't used to this stuff, they think when they hear the word filth, they're imagining things like dirt or things like germs. Okay, so if I say to someone that a dog is filthy, some of them, they get defensive. They say, not my dog. I wash my dog. I shampoo my dog. My dog is clean. They don't understand what I'm trying to say here. That dog wasn't filthy because there's dirt on it. No, it's actually the opposite. The dirt is not filthy. The dog is filthy. Okay? The dirt is only filthy because it touched the dog. Okay? The dog is the actual filth. If you wash that dog in your bathtub, well, now you just made the bathtub filthy because a dog was in it. Okay? The dog is the filth. I'm not saying that there's filth on the dog that you can wash off. The dog is the filth. You understand? Just like later in this list, we're going to talk about, urine and feces. Okay, we don't say feces is filthy because there's something on it. No, the feces itself is the filth. Right? Everything in this list is like that. Wine is filthy because it's wine. Whether something else got put into it or not doesn't matter. The wine is the filth. Dogs are filthy because they're dogs. Whether they were washed or not washed doesn't matter. The dog is the filth. You understand? The pig is the filth. Okay. Next in the list, it says the dead animal. Okay. When we say dead animal here, this is a translation of the Arabic word mayta. Mayta, M-A-Y-T-A-H, mayta. The Arabic word mayta refers to any animal that died not through an Islamic zakat. Okay, in the Sharia, there are ways of killing an animal that will make it so that this animal will be halal for us to eat. Okay? One of those ways is what we call dhabh, when you cut the animal's throat in a particular way. That animal that's been killed in that way is called dhabiha. Some people write it with a Z. They say zabiha. That's going to be permissible for us to eat. But cutting the throat is not the only way to render an animal permissible to eat. Okay. And the umbrella term to refer to all of the ways of rendering an animal permissible to eat is called the cat. The cat. Not zakat. I'm not talking about the charity we pay, zakat. It's a TH in front. The cat. All right. The cat is an umbrella term that covers dhabh, which is cutting the throat, and also covers the other ways that you can kill certain animals and make them permissible to eat. Any animal that died, and it wasn't through any of those types of the cat, that animal is called meta. An animal that died without going through an Islamic zakat, that animal is called meta. And meta is najis. It's filthy. We're not allowed to touch it. We're not allowed to come into contact with it. And we surely are not allowed to eat it. Okay? Meta refers, or it includes most of the meat that we see in the supermarkets here in the United States. Those chickens were not generally killed in the Sharia compliant way. They did not go through an Islamic zakat. So those chickens are meta. The beef in the supermarket is meta. Okay. And just so you know, if you find a dead animal and you don't know how it was killed, you have to conclude that this animal is meta. Because the default, whenever an animal dies, the default is that it's meta. All right, you cannot conclude that an animal is halal for you to eat unless you have evidence that it's halal to eat. For example, a witness who saw how it was killed confirmed for you that it was killed in the Islamically correct way. Then you can say, okay, that meat is halal. Okay, but if you don't have that information, if you don't have any evidence, such as you saw it be killed, or you killed it yourself, or someone who knows how it was killed informed you of how it was killed, these are all types of evidence. If you have evidence that the animal was killed via an Islamic zakat, well, then you can conclude that it is halal to eat. Otherwise, you must conclude that it's meta. So the food in the supermarkets, the food in the fast food joints, you know, Chick-fil-A and Popeyes and McDonald's and all these places, all of that meat, the ruling is it's meta, unless you have some kind of reliable evidence that it was slaughtered or went through an Islamic zakat. Are we clear on this? So if you're driving down the highway and you see a dead deer on the side of the road and it looks real fresh, hasn't even started stinking yet, this does not mean you can eat it. Why? Because that animal is dead. And unless you have evidence that it died through an Islamic zakat, you must conclude that it's meta. And meta is haram to consume, and it's najis, which means you need to avoid even coming into contact with it. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, then continues. He says, except the human, aquatic life, and locusts. So he gives the three exceptions to this rule. There are three things that are meta that are not najis. The first one in the list is the human being. Okay, a human being, when a human dies, the human does not become meta. The human does not become najis. Okay, this is because Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran that he honored the human beings. Okay, so when the human dies, he does not become najis. You do not have to avoid contact with a dead human. Okay, if a human being dies, you're allowed to pick that person up, carry them to where they can be washed and shrouded, etc. You don't have to avoid contact with a dead human. Even if that dead person is a kafir, You don't have to avoid contact with them. You can pick them up. You can move them around. Um, Obviously, we don't do funeral services for kafirs, or at least not the Islamic funeral services. Um, but even a dead kafir is not considered najas. Okay, there's an ayah in the Quran that some people misinterpret. They think the ayah means that kafirs are najas. Okay, but the ayah doesn't mean that the body of the kafir is najas. No, it's referring to the aqidah of the kafir as something that's najas. Okay, the belief of those who are not Muslims is something that's filthy, something that's horrible and gross and detestable. Okay, but it doesn't mean the body of a kafir is najas. No, that's not the case. Okay, so among the types of meta that are not najas is the human being. Just because the dead human is not meta, this does not mean that we can eat him. Okay, there are many reasons why something might be forbidden for us to eat. One of those reasons is if it's najas. So we can't eat, the steaks down at, Cracker Barrel because it's najas. All right, if something is najas, we're forbidden from eating it. But there are also things that are not najas, and nonetheless, we're forbidden from eating it. For example, things that are harmful to us, we're forbidden from eating, even if they're not najas. That's why it's not permissible for us to eat glass. That's why it's not permissible for us to eat poison. Okay, even if those things are not najas, they're still haram to consume because they're harmful. Okay, it's forbidden for us to consume things that will harm our minds, like narcotics. Even if they're not najas, it's haram for us to consume it because of the harm it does. Okay, there are some things we're forbidden from consuming because they're gross. They're mustaqdhar. They're not najas. They're mustaqdhar. Mustaqdhar means that they're gross, but nonetheless, they're not najas. Like if these gross things were on your clothing, they would not invalidate your salat. Okay, examples of things that are gross but not najas would be like snot, like a loogie. Like if someone hawked a loogie and spit it out, that spit is gross, but it's not najas. Okay, semen is gross, but it's not najas. These things, if they're on your clothing, they don't break your salat. Okay, but nonetheless, the fact that they're gross means it's haram for you to consume it. You can't eat these things. Okay, yes, it's haram to eat snot. Okay, it's haram to eat boogies or boogers, however y'all say it. Where I'm from, we say boogies, but apparently the rest of the country says boogers with an R in it. These things are forbidden to eat even though they're not najas. And the human being also is forbidden to eat even though the dead human is not najas. The dead human is forbidden to eat because humans have a certain sacredness to them. And it's the sacredness which is why it's forbidden to eat a human. I don't want any of us here to make the mistake of thinking when we say pure and impure, when we say tahir and najas, I don't want anyone to think that it's the same thing as saying permissible to eat and not permissible to eat. That's not the case at all. So among the things that are meta that are not najas would be the dead human. Also, aquatic life. By aquatic life, it means any animal that lives in the water and cannot live in a normal way outside of the water. These animals, even if they're meta, they're not najas. This is why seafood is something that Muslims can eat. Because that fish, even if it didn't go through an Islamic zakat, the fact that it's a fish means that meta is not najas, so we can eat it. Okay? Any animal that lives in the water and cannot live in a normal way outside of the water, this animal, when it dies, it does not become najas, and we are allowed to consume it. And the third and final exception to the meta rule are locusts. Okay, a locust, which by the way is a type, it's a type of grasshopper. A locust, when it dies, its body does not become najis, and it's permissible for you to eat a locust. Someone asks, is lobster halal? Yes, lobster is halal. We're on locusts right now. One thing I want to clarify is that when we say locust, we're talking about a type of grasshopper. It looks like a grasshopper and acts like a grasshopper. In fact, I'm inclined to say that it is a grasshopper. We, in some parts of the country, we like to use the word locust to refer to cicadas. A cicada is an animal that comes out the ground every 17 years, although some of them it's every 13 years. But they come out of the ground in large numbers. They go up in the trees. They make a lot of noise. They for like a month or so in the summer, they're all over the place, and then they disappear again. These cicadas, people sometimes call them locusts, but they're not locusts. All right, if a cicada dies, that dead body is, in fact, najis. Okay, because that is not a locust. The only exceptions to the Meta rule are humans, aquatic life, and locusts. Are there any questions about that one? So far, how many things have we mentioned? Wine, other alcoholic beverages, dogs, pigs, offspring of a dog or a pig. And then number 6 was Meta, like the animal that died without going through an Islamic zakat. Okay, next in the list is what I would number as number 7 and 8. Number 7 is blood. Okay, blood is najis filthy. So if you get blood on your clothing or on your body, or if you touch it while you're in the salat, or if you're carrying some while in the salat, it will invalidate your salat with some exceptions. There are cases where blood is excused in the salat, but not in all cases. So you want to be careful about this. You should also know that the red stuff that drips out of your meat, like when you go to the halal store and you get your meat and you open up the bag of meat, sometimes there's like some red liquid that drips out of it. Okay, that red liquid is not blood. That red liquid is not blood. Okay, that's just like moisture that came out of the meat. Okay, it's red. It acquired a red color from the meat, but it doesn't mean that it's blood. Okay, and if you do encounter a piece of meat that actually did have a piece of blood in it, as long as that meat was slaughtered properly and hung up for a time so that all the blood could drip out of it, any blood that does remain inside that carcass, any blood that does remain along the meat would be excused. Okay, meaning it wouldn't count as, it wouldn't be treated as something najis. Next in the list, it says pus. Okay, pus is not the same thing as blood. Okay, blood is red. Pus has a yellowish color. Okay, sometimes if you cut yourself and your cut goes, a little bit deep, but not too deep, pus will come out. Like a little yellowish fluid will come out and it'll cover up the cut and harden. That yellowish substance that comes out, pus, is also najis. MashaAllah, someone asked a very good question. Some Muslims claim that if you put alcohol into a dish that you're cooking, or say like one of your ingredients contained alcohol, they say the alcohol burns out of it, and so therefore it's halal to eat. Okay, this is nonsense. Okay, this is nonsense. All right. Even if it is true that the alcohol burns out, and I'm not certain that that's true, but even if it is true, the whole dish was contaminated by the najis filth before it burned out. So the bit of alcohol that went into the pot made that a whole entire pot contaminated. And if the alcohol burned out, everything that remains in the pot is still contaminated with najis and therefore not permissible to eat. So this whole alcohol burning out thing, it doesn't fly. That doesn't work at all. And the wild thing is, like, I don't know, like people don't seem to understand the notion of filth. You know, if it weren't alcohol, if it were, say, urine, if somebody was making a soup and I said, hey, put this, tablespoon of urine in there, it'll make it taste great. Okay. And then even if someone were to say, just cook it for a while, it'll cook out, it'll burn out. Are you going to eat that soup that had urine in it? No, you're not. Okay. Because you know that urine is filthy. You're not going to eat anything that urine touched. If I told somebody to put blood into their soup, y'all wouldn't eat that because it had blood in it. If I told you to put vomit in the soup or feces in the soup, even if I told you it'll burn out, y'all ain't going to eat that. But somehow for alcohol, you got these people acting like, no big deal. I remind you, the very first thing that was mentioned in the list was wine, followed by the other alcoholic beverages. It's mentioned first in the list. Okay, these things are religiously filthy. They contaminate whatever they come into contact with. Okay, the fact that it might evaporate doesn't change the fact that prior to evaporating, it contaminated the rest of the dish. Let's keep going. Next in the list, which by my counting would be number 9, is vomit. By vomit, we mean that which comes from the stomach up into the mouth. Okay, this is what we mean when we say vomit. All right, something that came from below the throat, like you swallowed it and it went down below the throat, and then it came back up. From the stomach, it came back up. This is what we mean when we say vomit. Okay, it doesn't have to necessarily look like vomit. Okay, it's possible for somebody to eat a few spoonfuls of food and like 2 seconds later vomit it up, and it still looks like the food that he swallowed. Okay, maybe it didn't change. Maybe it doesn't look like vomit, but the fact of the matter is it went down to the stomach, it came back up, it's vomit, therefore it is najis, filthy. Next in the list, the translator said stools. I believe what he meant is simply stool without the S at the end. Stool. Stool is another word for feces. Feces, number 10 on the list. Feces is najis, filthy. Number 11 on the list, urine. Urine is najis, filthy. Next on the list, number 12, is pre-ejaculation fluid. Do y'all know what we mean when we say pre-ejaculation fluid? It refers to that fluid that might come out of one's private part when they get sexually excited. Okay, I'm not talking about the semen that comes out when a person climaxes. I mean, before that, a person might, to use the common term, get wet. That wetness that comes out, when the person, gets sexually excited, that wetness is najis, filthy. Okay, so anything that it touches will be contaminated by it. And if you have on your body or clothing some of that fluid or something contaminated by that fluid, it will render your salat invalid. Next on the list is wadi. Okay, wadi wadi is I don't know any English word for this. It's a substance that sometimes comes out of the person. Its color is like clear or white. It's a liquid that comes out. Um, like it might come out, for example, if someone lifts something that's very, very, very heavy and they're straining and they strain very hard, this substance might come out. It's called wedi. People with certain types of medical conditions, they might find that when they urinate, after the urine comes out, some wedi comes out. Um, I really don't know how to describe it any more than that. But if this happens to you, if some wedi comes out, just know that that also is najis. The next one in the list, the one that in the book is labeled as number 7, but wedi by my counting would have been number 13. Number 7 here is the strong opinion is that let me just read it. It says changed liquid from a sleeping person's mouth. Okay, apparently on the surface, it seems as if what this one is saying is that if a person slobbers while they sleep, that the slobber is najis filthy. And this is not the ruling of the madhab. Okay, the madhab does not say that saliva is najis filthy. Okay, even if the person, due to their sleep, even if that saliva changed so that it smells different, for example, or has a different color, for example, that change does not render it najis filthy. Okay, some scholars, mashallah, when they encountered this sentence, they tried to explain it away by saying, well, if the saliva changed because of something that came up from the stomach into the mouth, that must be what he's referring to. Like say someone had acid reflux, and so something from the stomach comes up into the mouth while he's sleeping. And so the saliva changed because of what came up from his stomach. If that happens, then yes, the saliva is, in fact, contaminated by najis filth. But it still doesn't merit mention in the list. It still wouldn't merit mention in the list. Why? Because if something comes up from your stomach into your mouth, well, then that's vomit. And vomit was already mentioned in the list. Okay? So if that's what was meant, if he meant that while you're asleep, some vomit goes into your mouth and it changes your saliva, there's no need to mention it because vomit was already listed. And if he simply means that the saliva of the mouth changed just by itself because you were asleep for a long time, well, that doesn't render it najis. Next in the list, the one that I would count as number 14, it says semen of the dog, swine, and their offspring. So I mentioned earlier that semen is not najis. Okay, semen is not najis. Semen is mustaqdhar. It's gross, but it's not najis. And this is true for the semen of all the animals, not only the human semen, but even, semen of a horse or a semen of a giraffe or whatever. Many of the people who raise animals and work at zoos and things like that, sometimes this substance gets on them. Okay, it's important for them to understand that this semen is not najis. Okay, it's gross, it's mustaqdhar. However, the semen of a dog is najis because it came out of a dog. The semen of a pig is najis because it came out of a pig. And the semen of an animal that is the offspring of a dog or the offspring of a pig also is najis because it came out of an animal which is the offspring of a dog or the offspring of a pig. Okay, so that is number 14 in the list of things that's najis. Semen from a dog, a pig, or something that's part dog or part pig. And last in the list of things that are najis, it's listed as number 9 in the book, but by my count, I would call it number 15. Milk. Milk of that whose meat isn't consumed. Okay, so any animal that we're not allowed to eat, the milk from that animal is najis. Okay? So you need to ask yourself, if there's an animal that produces milk, so we're talking about mammals here, mammals are the ones that produce milk, is that mammal an animal that we're permitted to eat? If the answer is yes, then the milk from that mammal is not najis and we are permitted to drink it. So we're permitted to drink milk from a cow. Why? Because we're allowed to eat cows. We're permitted to drink milk from a sheep. Why? Because we're permitted to eat sheep. Similarly, we can drink milk from a goat, milk from a camel, because we're permitted to eat these things. But we would also be permitted to drink milk from a deer, or milk from a moose, okay, or milk from a whale, okay? The milk of any animal whose meat we're permitted to eat, that milk is not najis, therefore we can consume it. As for the animals that we are not permitted to eat, the milk from those animals is najis, filthy, and we must avoid it. So lion milk and cat milk and wolf milk and elephant milk, these types of milk are najis. They're najis, filthy. Why? Because we're not allowed to eat those animals. Okay? So the milk of a dog, the milk of a pig, the milk of something part dog or part pig also is najis because we're not allowed to eat those animals. You see how it works? But then he says, except the human. So the one exception to this rule is the human being. All right, the human being is an animal that we are not allowed to eat. Okay, we're not allowed to eat humans. But even though we're not allowed to eat human beings, the milk of the human is not najis. Okay, according to the rule, the fact that we don't eat humans means that human milk is najis, filthy. But no, humans are an exception to this rule. The milk of a human, it's not najis, it's pure. Despite the fact that we can't eat humans, the milk from a human is pure and not najis. Any questions about this list? Okay, let's keep going. There's a big section of the text that's missing here. Okay, so at the top of page 16, or perhaps you can even put it, at the end of that number 9 there, there's a clarification in the text that the author apparently missed, or maybe it was missing from the copy he had. But the text next has a sentence next that means, as for the sexual fluid of an animal other than a dog, pig, or their offspring, as well as, and from there it picks up with what he translated. So it would say, as well as the embryo. I'll read it again so y'all can write it down. As for the sexual fluid, talking about semen here, whether it's the male semen or the female semen, as for the sexual fluid of an animal other than a dog, pig, or their offspring, as well as the embryo and the moisture from the private parts, these are clean. Okay, that's what it should read at the top of page 16. As for the sexual fluid of an animal other than a dog, pig, or their offspring, as well as the embryo and moisture from the private parts, these are clean. Clean, meaning they're pure, they're not najis. So what is it saying here? First off, when it says the embryo, okay, the translator translated embryo he put the word embryo here, but the Arabic text has two different words here. He just translated both of them as embryo, but the Arabic text uses the word, a word that refers to a clot, like a very small thing that might be in the womb of the female, like almost like a blood clot, very small. And it also uses a word that refers to a clump of flesh, so it would be bigger than the clot. I don't know if the word embryo is a good translation for both of these terms, but what he's getting at here are the various fluids that might come out of the private parts of animals. Are they najis or are they not najis? So first he begins by saying the sexual fluid, right? The semen that the male releases, or the female version of semen that the female might release. As long as it didn't come from a dog, a pig, or something that's part dog or part pig, these substances are pure. They're not najis. Sexual fluid from animals is pure, not najis. The embryo, what he calls embryo, meaning if there's something developing inside the womb of the female, and it's very small, it comes out of the female as just like a clot, like a very small, thing, or like a little small lump of flesh. These things are pure. Okay, these things are pure. These things are not considered to be najis. And he says the moisture from the private parts. Okay, what he means here is the vagina of an animal. If the vagina of an animal is moist rather than dry, that moisture is pure. Okay, it's pure. It's not considered to be najis. Next, he says, the part which is cut off from an animal is like it's dead. Okay, this is a general principle. If you have an animal that's alive, okay, the animal is alive. We already said if an animal dies, not through an Islamic zakat, then that animal becomes meta. That body, that carcass is najis, right? It's najis, filthy, because it's meta, right? Now we're saying, well, what if the animal didn't die? What if the animal stayed alive, but something got cut off of the animal? Okay? Like imagine somebody saw a cat and they chopped the tail off of the cat. So the cat is still alive. Cat didn't die, but you got this tail that's sitting in the street. The cat ran off. His tail is in the street. What's the ruling on that tail? He says the part which is cut off from an animal, meaning the animal stayed alive, but something got cut off of it, that part that got cut off is meta. Okay, it's treated as if it were a dead animal in and of itself. So that tail of that cat in this example is najis, because if the cat itself had died without an Islamic zakat, the cat's body in its entirety would be najis. So this part of the cat's body is najis. Why? Because it's no longer connected to the living animal. It's as if it's dead. Okay, so whatever is cut off from a living animal is najis, filthy, because it's as if it's dead. And then he says, except, so more exceptions, except the hair of an edible animal. Yeah, this translation is also a bit weird. Let me tell you how I think it should be translated. Except the hair of an edible animal, comma, its feathers, comma, fur, comma, and wool, comma, for they are pure, period. This is how I would translate it. Except for the hair of an edible animal, comma, its feathers, comma, fur, comma, and wool, comma, for they are pure. So we're saying here there's the general rule that anything which was separated from the body of a living animal, that part that was separated from its body is meta. It's najas. But there are exceptions. The hair of an edible animal. So if this animal is something we're allowed to eat, then if you shave some hair off of it, that hair does not become najas. Right? That hair remains pure. Similarly, the feathers. If there's an animal that we're allowed to eat and you pluck the feathers off of it, those feathers are not najas. Same with fur. If you shave the fur off of an animal that we're allowed to eat, that fur is not najas as long as the animal is still alive. In all these cases, we're saying the animal is alive. You just removed some hair, some fur, some feathers, or some wool. These things that you remove from the animal are pure. They're not najas. So if you have sheep, okay, it's common for sheep farmers, sheep herders, to shear their sheep at the end of winter. Okay, they cut all of the wool off of the sheep and they sell it. That wool is pure. It's not najas. Okay, why is it pure? Because we're allowed to eat sheep. So what was cut off from, like the wool that was removed from the body of the sheep, is pure and not najas. And the same is true for fur. Okay, so if you find an animal that has fur that we're allowed to eat, you can shave off that fur and it would be pure. Feathers. You know, a lot of us, you know, we have, you know, winter coats or pillows or something that's stuffed with goose feathers. Okay, these feathers, assuming they were removed while the animal was still alive, these feathers would be pure. Okay, they would not be pure if the animal died. Right? If they killed the goose and then plucked the feathers, those feathers are all najas because the entire body of the goose became najas once the goose was killed. Unless, of course, it was killed via an Islamic zakat, in which case the animal would not become najas. But if the animal died without an Islamic zakat, the whole thing is najas, including the feathers and the fur. I want to make that clear. We're talking right now about an animal that's alive. It didn't die, but we removed from the animal some hair, some feathers, some fur, or some wool. That part that we remove from the living animal is pure, not najas. And the condition is that it's an animal that we're allowed to eat. That's the condition. It has to be an animal we're allowed to eat. Inshallah, that is clear. I know I'm a little bit over time. I'm just going to finish the rest of this paragraph real fast. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, none of the impurities, talk about none of the things that are najas, become pure except three things. So he says, anything in this list, those 15 things we mentioned that are najas, none of those things can ever become pure. Okay, if you took, you know, some feces, it doesn't matter how hard you wash it. It doesn't matter if you put it in some bleach. Okay, it doesn't matter what you did to try to clean it. It's never going to become pure. It's never going to stop being najas because it's still feces. And feces is najas. There's nothing you can do to make it stop being najas. And this is true for all of those 15 things in the list. They never stop being najas except for these exceptions he's mentioning right here. Number one, he says wine, as well as whatever container was holding the wine. The wine does become pure. It does stop being najas when it becomes vinegar by itself. Okay, and this by itself is very important because wine will only become pure as long as nothing was put into the wine. You know, some people what they do is, in order to accelerate the process of like the juice becoming wine and the wine becoming vinegar, They add something into it. Someone, for example, might put a piece of bread into the wine because if you put the bread in it, it'll turn to vinegar faster. Or something else, bread or perhaps other things. If you put something into the wine in order to accelerate the process of the wine becoming vinegar, then what happens is the wine does not become pure. It remains najis, filthy, even after it turns to vinegar. And that's because of the thing that you put in it. And if you put a piece of bread into wine, what happens? That bread immediately gets contaminated by the wine. And then when the wine turns to vinegar, the wine becomes pure, and the container holding the wine becomes pure, and the bread that's in there does not become pure. It remains contaminated, and it instantly contaminates the vinegar and contaminates the container. And all of this happens instantly, immediately. So the very moment that wine turns to vinegar is the very moment that the vinegar is contaminated. Okay, so wine will only become pure if it turned to vinegar all by itself without adding anything into it. But if that wine becomes vinegar all by itself without adding anything into it, then the wine becomes pure because it's no longer wine, it's now vinegar. And the container, which had been contaminated by the najis wine, the container also becomes pure because the wine that's on it also became pure in and of itself without adding anything into it. The second type of najis filth that can actually become pure, it says the leather hide, which becomes impure by death, can be purified by tanning. It says here it's external and internal. What it means is both sides of the hide. Okay? So we're talking here about animal skins. If an animal dies, okay, not through an Islamic zakat, it died and it became meta. That means that animal carcass is najis. The whole thing, the bones are najis, the flesh is najis, the skin is najis, the fur is najis. All of it is najis. Okay, the whole thing is najis. Even though that thing is najis, if you pull the skin off of that animal and you remove the hair from it, you can do a process called tanning. And if you go through the tanning process, that animal skin will become leather. It'll become like a fabric. And so the nature of the thing changed. Just like how wine stopped being wine and became vinegar, it became a completely different thing. Similarly, the hide of that dead animal, by tanning, it becomes something different. It becomes a brand new thing called leather. Leather is not najis. So tanning can turn a najis hide into a pure piece of leather, although technically that pure piece of leather would be contaminated, so you would have to wash the leather. But after you tan it, you just wash the leather and then it's pure. When it says tanning the external and internal, it means both sides of the skin. All right, the side of the skin that had like the flesh attached to it has to be tanned, but the side of the skin that had the fur on it also has to be tanned. And the third and final thing, case where something impure can become pure, it says that which becomes an animal. That which becomes an animal. He's referring here to what appears to us as if a dead thing just turned into an animal. You know, like I don't know if you've ever seen a dead animal. You see a dead animal there, and there's nothing in it. It just looks like a dead animal. But if you watch it for a day or two, suddenly you're going to see maggots in there now. There's going to be maggots and creatures emerging from this dead carcass. To a person who's not trained in biology, they might think that the dead flesh of the dead animal turned into a living animal. And so that's why it's written this way. It might appear to the untrained eye that a dead thing came alive, which means the meta, which is najis because it's dead, once it becomes alive, it's not najis anymore, because living animals are not najis. Okay? Animals, while they're alive, are pure. They don't become najis unless they die and become meta. And the only exception to that would be dogs, pigs, and something that's part dog or part pig, because those things are najis even while they're alive. But all the other animals, while they're alive, they're not najis. They become najis when they die. And so if dead flesh somehow turned into living maggots, then the ruling would be that the thing that was dead was najis, and these maggots that are now alive are not najis. That's why it's worded this way. But of course, those of us who know a bit of science, we know that the reality of what's happening here, it's not that the flesh of the dead animal turned into maggots. It's that there were small eggs that were laid into that flesh that we didn't see. Those eggs hatched, and the maggots grew. Okay, so it's not the case that the dead animal turned into a living animal or turned into many living animals, but we're just to understand that if something appears that way, if you see living animals coming out of an animal carcass, know that those living animals are not najis because they're alive. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. If you have questions, put them in the box. I think there are a few I haven't gotten to yet. So let's get to it. Yes, lobster is halal. Correct. This whole alcohol burns out thing, this is not the ruling of the Shafi'i school, and I don't expect it to be the ruling of any other school, but I can't speak about the other schools. Someone asked a question about Imam Shafi'i going and making dua at the grave of Abu Hanifa. Yes, this is confirmed. I mean, I'm not confirming the exact wording you put there, but it is confirmed that Imam Shafi'i used to, when he was in Baghdad, if he had a need, he would go to the grave of Abu Hanifa and make his dua there. And not much time would pass before his need was fulfilled. Gelatin. Okay, this is an important question. The ruling of the Shafi'i school is that gelatin, which is made from, pig toes, or made from any dead animal that didn't die through an Islamic zakat, this gelatin is najis, filthy, and we are not allowed to consume it. Is it the case that one of the other madhabs has a different ruling? That is very possible. Unfortunately, I'm not knowledgeable about the different opinions in the Maliki school on this issue. I know there is some talk about it. This is something you'd be better off asking someone more knowledgeable than I in the Maliki school. Someone asked about a little blood left over after halal meat is cooked. Okay, I wasn't talking about after the meat is cooked. I'm saying when you first open up the package of raw meat, there might be some little red drips, little red liquid in there. I'm saying that red liquid isn't blood. I'm not saying that the meat is not meta. Okay, if you bought that meat at the halal shop and you have evidence that it was slaughtered in the Islamic way, well, then that meat is definitely not meta. because it's zabiha. And zabiha meat is not meta at all. It's not najis. It's pure and permissible to eat. Okay? As for how you cook the meat, it doesn't matter. Okay, if the meat is zabiha, all right, if it was slaughtered properly, that meat is pure and permissible to eat, even if you don't cook it at all. Even if you eat it raw, you can do that. All right, it's not haram to eat raw meat, just like it's not haram to eat cooked meat. You can cook it rare or medium rare or well done or burnt to a crisp. If that's how you want to eat it, you can eat it because the meat itself is not najis. Someone asked about a baby spitting out food. Okay, this is also an important question. Babies, as many of you know, are prone to vomiting. Okay, babies sometimes vomit. And what I was taught is that the mother, not the father, but the mother of the baby, if the baby vomits on the mother, I'm sorry, I'm starting to question if I remember this properly. I'll put it like this. If a baby vomits, you're not required to rinse out the baby's mouth and possibly waterboard the baby. Okay? After you've cleaned the vomit away, when you return to holding the baby, that baby's simple saliva technically is contaminated because the vomit that had been in, because the baby's mouth was never washed after it vomited. That saliva from the baby's mouth that might get onto, like if you're holding the baby here, it might get onto your shirt or something like that. That saliva from the baby's mouth is excused if it's on the mother's clothing. It's excused. So she would not have to wash it off and she could pray wearing that shirt. As for the vomit itself, this is what I'm not so sure about. I don't want to answer on that one. If you're the father, then yes, you need to wash it. But you don't need to make wudu. Okay, this is something I tried to make clear on the very first lesson for this book when we defined what purification is. The definition we gave for purification was what? That it is lifting hadath, or removing najis, or that which accomplishes the same aims as those two, or has the same appearance as those two. 4 different types of purification. The first type was lifting hadath, right? There's 2 types of hadath, minor and major. Wudu is something we do to lift minor hadath. Ghusl is something we do to lift major hadath. Wudu and ghusl pertain to the first category, lifting hadath. But when you're talking about vomit, we're not talking about hadath. Okay? We already talked about the things that cause hadath. There were 4 things that cause minor hadath, and there were 6 things that necessitate ghusl. Okay, 5 of them actually cause major hadath, and 1 of them is death. Vomit isn't in either of those lists. So when we're talking about vomit, we're not talking about hadath. And therefore, since we're not talking about hadath, the word wudu should not come to your mind. The word ghusl should not come to your mind, because wudu and ghusl have their purpose, which is to remove hadath. Vomit is najas, not hadath. It's najas. And there's a whole separate type of purification that we do to remove najas. And it's not wudu, and it's not ghusl. It's something else, which we're going to talk about in the very next chapter, where it says purifying impurities. That's where we're going to talk about how you remove najas. Okay, it's not by wudu, and it's not by ghusl. Okay, it's by washing in particular ways. Okay, but to answer the question, if a baby vomits on you, like full-on vomit, then yes, you will need to remove those clothes or wash them before you can pray. But you will not need to make wudu, because having a baby vomit on you doesn't break your wudu. Someone asked, what other seafood considered haram? There is no seafood that's considered haram. Okay, all seafood, by seafood, I mean animals that live in the water and cannot live normally outside of the water. All animals that meet that description are permissible for us to eat, unless, they become haram due to some other reason, like being harmful. Like some fish are poisonous, so obviously we can't eat the poisonous ones. There might be some fish that if you eat it, you're going to get high or something. In that case, we can't eat that one. Okay, but the general rule is any animal that lives its life in the water and cannot live normally outside of water, when that animal dies, it remains pure. It does not become meta. We can still eat it. There's no difference between animals that have scales, like fish, or animals that don't have scales, like catfish. There's no difference between the ones that have shells, like clams and oysters and crabs and lobsters, versus the ones that do not have shells, like sharks. And there's no difference between the ones that breathe air, like dolphins and whales, and the ones that do not breathe air. Okay, these animals live in the water and cannot live normally outside of the water. So therefore, we're allowed to eat these things. But you need to be careful. The ruling of the Shafi'i school is that if the animal can live in a normal fashion outside of the water, then it doesn't count as aquatic life. So you do need to be careful, because some species of crabs live equally well on land and in the water. So they don't count as aquatic life. You do need to be careful about which kind of crab you're eating. I'm not aware of any ruling from Imam Shafi'i that shellfish is not permissible to eat. I'm not sure where you heard that from. It's well known in the madhab that all aquatic life is permissible to eat. My guess is somebody, whoever told you that, my guess is that you were probably taught, or he probably heard some of the details I just mentioned about crabs. That some crabs are not permissible to eat because they can live on land. The blue crab, for example, which is what we eat in Maryland, the blue crab can live just fine on land. Okay, and because it can live on land as well as in the water, the ruling of the Shafi'i school is that this does not count as sea life. And because it doesn't count as an aquatic animal, we are not automatically allowed to eat it. And since there's no way for us to perform an Islamic zakat of it, there's no way for us to eat a blue crab in a halal way according to the Shafi'i school. Okay. Those of us in Maryland who eat blue crabs, we do so based off of a ruling from the Maliki school, where there is a way to do an Islamic zakat for that crab. So even to them, that crab doesn't count as sea life. Okay, it doesn't count as sea life. It's not automatically halal. But for the Maliki school, there's a way to do an Islamic zakat. So it won't. So after it dies, it won't be meta. In the Shafi school, there's no way to do an Islamic zakat for the blue crab. Just to make that clear. As for lobsters cannot live on land. They live their entire lives in the water and cannot live on land. So they clearly are aquatic life. Oysters are definitely permissible. Turtles, ordinary turtles. I'm not talking about sea turtles. I'm talking about ones with feet. Turtles do not count as aquatic life. Okay, turtles are reptiles. They're born on the land. They live just fine on the land. Even if they spend a lot of time in the water, that doesn't make them aquatic life. Same with like crocodiles and alligators. Even if they spend all their time in the water, they live just fine on land. Okay, so no, turtles are not part of this discussion. As for blue crabs, yes, I said blue crabs are haram, but I want to again emphasize that's the ruling of the Shafi'i madhab. The Maliki madhab has a way. And I think that's the last of the questions. So with that, let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. Barakallahu feekum. I'll see you inshallah ta'ala next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.